Let's meet Simone de Beauvoir. This French philosopher, feminist, and intellectual powerhouse is the cool aunt of feminist philosophy. Controversial, influential, and probably guaranteed to make you question everything you thought you knew about gender, freedom, and what it means to be human. Now, this might seem like an odd video for a conservative male pastor to do. However, I have found Simone to be one of the most significant existential philosophers. Because while I don't pretend to think I can know what it's like to be a woman, or to fully understand the challenges a woman experiences, Simone I have found to be a crucial guide in helping me see how different the world is experienced through the eyes of a woman. So step back in time with me and let's get to know this philosophy legend. It's mid-20th century France, World War II has just ended, existentialism is all the rage, and while Jean-Paul Sartre is busy being the poster boy for philosophical angst, de Beauvoir is in the corner saying, yeah, but have you ever considered how much it sucks to be a woman? Enter the philosopher who would revolutionize feminist thought, armed with a sharp intellect, a penchant for challenging social norms, and a burning desire to tell patriarchy, it's not me, it's you. Actually, it's definitely you. So here are some of her key concepts and ideas. First, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Simone de Beauvoir's famous quote means that being a woman is not something you're born with, but something society teaches and shapes over time. That biological sex might determine your physical body, but becoming a woman is about learning social expectations, behaviors, and roles that culture assigns to females. So think of it sort of like this. A baby girl doesn't automatically know how to wear makeup, act ladylike, or fulfill traditional female roles. Instead, from childhood, girls are gradually taught specific ways of behaving, dressing, and thinking that society considers feminine. And these lessons come from family, media, school, and cultural norms. So to further illustrate this, girls might be encouraged to be gentle, emotional, and nurturing, while boys are pushed to be tough and competitive. These aren't natural instincts, she argues, but learned behaviors. And she says that these social expectations limit women's potential by defining them narrowly instead of recognizing them as full, complex human beings with individual capabilities. And her idea was revolutionary because she suggested gender roles are constructed by society, not determined by nature, that women aren't inherently weak or subordinate, they're made to feel that way through persistent social conditioning and expectations. Second is women as the other. And this was her analysis of how women are defined in relation to men. It's sort of like women are the supporting characters in the story of humanity, and Simone's not having it. In her perspective, the other describes how society historically defines women by comparing them to men, essentially treating women as second or peripheral to the male experience. And so men are then seen as the default or the standard human beings, while women are positioned as different, deviation away, and in the end less important. And this concept means women are perpetually defined in relation to men as daughters, wives, mothers, rather than as independent, complete individuals with inherent worth. And it used to drive me crazy and my wife when someone would introduce her as, oh, this is Pastor Jordan's wife. No, it's just Carissa. And then societal, men have been considered the active, central subjects who make history and define rules, while women are passive objects acted upon. And practically, this is going to manifest in multiple ways. Women's achievements are often minimized or contextualized through male relationships. Women's perspectives are frequently marginalized in politics, professional, intellectual, and church spaces. And women are expected to adjust and conform to male-defined standards. And so women's identity ends up frequently being reduced to their reproductive or domestic potential. And Simone argued that this othering systematically denies women full human agency. So it creates a power dynamic where women are fundamentally unequal, not through natural law, but through deeply ingrained societal and cultural mechanisms that limit their autonomy and self-distinction. The third piece was existential ethics. In Beauvoir's Existential Ethics, humans are fundamentally free to create their own meaning and identity, but this freedom comes with significant responsibility. Unlike predetermined essence, individuals continuously define themselves through choices and actions. So, for women specifically, this means rejecting predetermined roles and actively constructing authentic identities. That existential ethics demands that women recognize their inherent freedom, resist societal limitations, and make deliberate choices, and thus take responsibility for self-creation. And Beauvoir argued that many women avoid this challenging freedom by just simply accepting passive and predefined roles. But true ethical living in her mind requires confronting societal expectations, making conscious decisions, and continuously reinventing oneself. And this philosophy emphasizes personal agency over biological destiny, that women aren't bound by traditional expectations, but must courageously choose their own path, understanding that each choice shapes their fundamental identity, that the ethical imperative is constant self-reflection, active engagement with one's potential, and rejecting external definitions, instead embracing radical personal autonomy. 4 was her critique of marriage and motherhood. And this is her controversial analysis of traditional female roles. So she's the real wedding crasher, but instead of looking for a date, she's questioning the whole institution. Cue up Owen Wilson's "Wow." In her critique, marriage and motherhood simply represent systems that she saw as traditionally trapping women in predetermined roles, thus limiting their individual freedom and ultimately their potential for self-realization. Marriage, she argued, often functions as an economic and social contract where women surrender personal autonomy. And so traditionally, wives become economically dependent, losing independent identity and becoming extensions of their husbands' lives. And then motherhood. In a similar way, she saw motherhood as something that constrained women's existential freedom. Now, she did not reject motherhood categorically, but she did criticize how societal expectations make childbearing seem like that is a woman's ultimate purpose. And so she viewed pregnancy and child rearing as potentially restrictive experiences that could interrupt a woman's personal, professional, and intellectual development. And so Simone advocated for women to consciously choose these roles, but not be passively assigned them by societal expectations, in the end ensuring personal agency remains paramount. And then Sexuality and the Body, de Beauvoir's groundbreaking discussion of female sexuality and embodiment. It was sort of like she's given the talk, but it's philosophical and empowering. And in her analysis, women's sexuality and bodily experiences are deeply shaped by patriarchal social constructs that objectify and constrain female sexual experience and agency. And so she argued that traditional views, they tend to reduce women's bodies to just reproductive vessels and deny them genuine sexual pleasure and autonomy. And so women are taught to see their bodies as objects for male desire rather than sites of personal experience and satisfaction. And some of the key perspectives of this view are that women's sexuality is often defined by male expectations and societal norms that suppress female sexual desire and self-understanding and are frequently framed as passive rather than actively chosen. And so she challenges the notion that women's bodies are solely meant for reproduction or male pleasure. And she's advocating for women to reclaim bodily agency, understanding their sexual experiences as personal, complex, and self-determined. The body, in her view, should be a space of freedom, pleasure, and individual expression, not a predetermined biological destiny controlled by societal expectations. 6, intersectionality. Now, de Beauvoir didn't use this term, and she predates contemporary intersectional theory, but her work did lay critical groundwork by recognizing that women's experiences aren't uniform, but they deeply vary across different social contexts. And she acknowledged that women's oppression isn't experienced identically by all women. Factors like class, race, economic status, and cultural background significantly impact women's lived experiences. Poor women, for instance, face drastically different challenges compared to those who are wealthy. And here are some of the key insights she provides us with. Women's experiences of marginalization are complex and multifaceted. There's not a universal woman's experience, doesn't exist, but social and economic conditions profoundly shape individual opportunities and power dynamics that intersect in nuanced ways beyond simple gender categories. Now again, she didn't use the term intersectionality. That was coined later by Kimberly Crenshaw. She did recognize that gender oppression isn't experienced monolithically. She emphasized understanding individual women's specific social contexts rather than trying to give a blanket assumption about all female experience. And her philosophical approach, it highlighted how multiple social dimensions simultaneously shape women's freedom. And she challenged these simplistic, one-dimensional understandings of gender inequality. And then 7 was ethics of ambiguity. Her ethical philosophy was one that embraced the uncertainties and contradictions of human experience. It's like she was saying, life's messy, deal with it philosophically. And in her ethics of ambiguity, human existence is fundamentally uncertain and without predetermined meaning. That individuals must continuously create their own ethical purpose through conscious choices and engagement with freedom. And here we're going to encounter very similar themes to Sartre's philosophy. If you didn't know, they were actually lifelong partners. And first is that people have radical freedom to define themselves. And second, following this, is that ethical living requires acknowledging uncertainty. And then third, as you would expect, personal responsibility is crucial. That to live an authentic existence means to embrace ambiguity rather than seeking this kind of false sense of security by adopting predetermined roles or simply seeking comfort in external definitions. So unlike your traditional rigid moral systems, her ethics emphasized dynamic, contextual decision-making that individuals must continuously negotiate meaning through active and mindful choices. So the goal in her mind was not to achieve this like fixed moral state, but maintain an ongoing, authentic engagement with life's fundamental uncertainty. So what are some of the lasting impacts of her ideas? First is, again, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. This is de Beauvoir's center stage moment, the idea that launched 1,000 gender study dissertations. She's basically saying that what we consider feminine isn't some innate natural quality, but a set of behaviors and expectations that society drills into us from birth. It's as if she's exposing the wizard behind the curtain of gender roles. And this idea has been revolutionary in feminist theory, psychology, and sociology. And it's influenced everything from gender studies to queer theory to how we think about raising kids. And so every time you see a gender reveal party and cringe a little bit, that's probably a bit of de Beauvoir's influence. And then woman as the other. This was her analysis of a woman's place in society. And it's a bit of a doozy. She's arguing that throughout history, men have been considered the default humans, and women have been defined in relationship to them. Think about it this way, it's as if women are the sidekicks in the story of humanity. And she is calling for them to be the heroes of their own narratives. And this concept has been hugely influential in feminist theory, post-colonial studies, and also critical theory. It's shaped how we think about representation in media, power dynamics in society, and the psychology of oppression. And so every time you hear someone talk about male as default in character design or say in language, that's the influence of Simone. And then existentialist ethics. De Beauvoir takes the existentialist ideas of freedom and responsibility and she gives them a feminist twist. She's saying we're all free to choose our paths in life, but that freedom comes with the heavy responsibility of creating our own meaning and values. It's sort of like she gives us the keys to the universe and says, you drive. And this philosophical approach has influenced feminist ethics, existential psychology, and how we think about personal responsibility and authenticity. And so every self-help book about living your truth, it owes a little bit of a debt to Simone. Then for critique of marriage and motherhood, this is where she really stirred the pot. She argued that traditional marriage and motherhood rather than being the ultimate fulfillment for women, could be a source of oppression that limited women's freedom and potential. And these ideas have been hugely influential and also controversial in feminist theory, family studies, and social policy. And so they've shaped debates about work-life balance, reproductive rights, and the value of unpaid domestic labor. And then sexuality in the body. She was groundbreaking for her frank discussions of female sexuality and how our physical bodies shape our experiences. She argued for women's sexual agency and pleasure at a time when such topics were considered taboo. And these ideas have influenced feminist theory, sex education, and how we think about bodily autonomy and sexual ethics. Intersectionality, again, she didn't use the term, but her work considered how different forms of oppression based on gender, class, race, age, how they intersect and compound each other. And this approach has been hugely influential in modern feminist theory, critical race theory, and social justice movements. And so every time you hear someone talk about how different forms of oppression interact, they're building a bit on the groundwork that was laid by thinkers like de Beauvoir. And then ethics of ambiguity. Her take on ethics embraces the uncertainties and contradictions of human experience. She's saying there's not necessarily absolute values or clear-cut answers, but we still have to make the choices, and those choices require our responsibility. And this ethical approach has influenced existential psychology, moral philosophy, and how we think about ethical decision-making in complex situations. She was trying to give us a philosophy for the real world that wasn't so focused on things being black and white, because they rarely are. And de Beauvoir's influence on modern thought is hard to overstate. She's the philosophical fairy godmother of modern feminism, not always agreed with, sometimes rebelled against, but respected. And while you don't have to agree with all her views, in fact, there's a lot of her views I don't agree with, I have found her ideas to be incredibly valuable in understanding how different it is to be a woman. So the next time you're questioning gender roles, asserting your freedom to define yourself, or just feeling like the world's expectations of you, if you're a woman, are a bit BS, give a little nod to Simone.